In this video, we're going to go over some of the basics of the VASIS liquid control system and some of the things that you can do to make sure that your sprayer's ready for the season. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check power to make sure you're getting 12 volts into the system here. In most cases, there's going to be a cable like this that's got accessory power or ignition control power coming from either a trailer plug or another source that terminates into a 2-port here that then plugs into the main harness. So at the start of the season, it's a good idea to make sure, if your unit's not working correctly, to make sure that you've got power here. Testing power at any other spot is not going to guarantee that you've got good power going into the system. So this is the 2-port that is coming from the front of the truck, and this is where we want to test for 12 plus volts. Again, if you're getting 10 or 11 volts here, that means there's a voltage drop somewhere along the network, and that needs to be tested first. So if you don't have 12 volts here, the system may not function correctly. So we're going to plug this back in and then look at a few other things that you can do to make sure that you're ready for the season. So I've plugged in the main power connector that goes into a Y that eventually goes into the center port on the Storm Commander control box. So we just want to make sure that all those connections are clean, no corrosion, no debris. And once all that is done, the next step is to make sure that all your connectors are good. So over here, we've got a regulating valve connector, and we've got 3 boom connectors, and at the back here is a flow meter connector. So just visually inspect all connectors, make sure all the connectors are good, no corrosion. The weather packs sometimes tend to not mate well, especially if you've had them unplugged for a while. So just make sure that the pins inside aren't deformed or anything. If that's the case, of course, you want to take a look at that, get that all fixed before we start prepping the sprayer for the season. So once you've inspected all the connections, your 12 volts good, it is a good idea to just test everything to make sure that your flow meter and your regulating valves and your boom valves are all functioning correctly. The easiest way to do so would be to fire up the Storm Commander, wait for the little green light to turn green. So this green light over here indicates that you've got good connectivity between the controller and the receiver box. From here, tap the sim speed on mode. So I'm just going to turn on sim speed. It shows me 10 miles an hour. And at this point, I can turn the main switch on and then individually turn all the booms on. So turning the booms on, you should be able to see that each of the boom valves should operate correctly. If any of the valves are slow to respond or they don't open at all, we do have a problem somewhere. So, but if everything's working correctly, your boom valves should open and close without any delay. So we're going to close these one by one and see how it works. While you're at it, it's also a good idea to just make sure that your regulating valve is functioning correctly. For that, I'm going to tap where it says sim speed. There is a plus and minus button. So the minus button should open the regulating valve, which means more liquid is going to make its way back into the tank. And the plus should close the regulating valve, meaning that more liquid is going to make its way back into the valves and eventually into the booms. So once you've verified that your regulating valve is functioning correctly, the last thing that can be done is to check if your flow meter is working correctly. And for that, again, you hit where it says GPS speed, and then just hit the plus button a few times, turn the boom valves on, and you should start seeing numbers here. So I turn the boom valves on, turn sim speed on, and at this point, if you hit the plus button, it will increase flow, and you should be able to see some numbers show up here. If you're not seeing any numbers here and you've got liquid in the system, that means either we've got a flow meter problem or we've got another problem that's causing the liquid to not go through the flow meter. So once we've done this basic testing, the next step would be to do some diagnostics in the event that one of your boom valves doesn't work, or your regulating valve doesn't open, or your flow meter isn't working. So there's a few things that you can do diagnostics wise to test if the problem actually is with the wiring or the control piece or the actual valve itself. For that, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using a diagnostics kit. So we've got a diagnostics kit here that lets you test if you've got good signal and good power going into the valves and into the flow meter. So the first one that I have here is a cable with 3 lights and a male and female weather pack on both sides. The weather pack cable can be used to test both the regulating valve as well as the boom valves. So I'm just going to hook this up to the regulating valve first to see how we can use this to make sure we've got good signal and good power going to the regulating valve. So this is the connector that connects the regulating valve to the system, and that's the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug the male side into the connector here. If your regulating valve is not functioning correctly, you want to leave this other end unplugged for now, and then we're going to try and open and close the valve again to see if we can make these lights turn on and off. So now we don't have the regulating valve connected. I only have this connector, and I'm looking at these 3 lights here. So what I'm going to do is go into sim speed, and then plus should turn on one of the green lights and minus should turn on the other green light. So as long as you're able to get one green light to turn on when you hit plus and the other green light to turn on when you hit minus, that means that you have good signal coming into this valve here. At this point, if your regulating valve is still not working, that means the problem has to be between this point and this valve here. It could be the connector, it could be the valve itself, because as we can see here, we've got nice bright green lights on open and close. So at this point, I can plug the regulating valve in with the connector, and we can test it now. So the same connector can be used to test the boom valves as well. So now I'm going to unplug this from here. And I will plug it into one of the boom valves. This time, we're going to be plugging in this female side into the connector that is coming from the control box. With that plugged in, we've got 2 lights that turn on in this case. One is for signal and the other one is for power. So if I turn all booms off, I can see that only the power light is on and the signal light is off. This indicates that the box is able to supply good, clean power up to the connector. At this point, if I turn the booms on, I just gotta turn some speed on. I see that the green light turns on as well, which means we have good power and good signal coming all the way to this connector. Now at this point, we can plug the other end of this into the boom valve. And repeat the test. You're going to turn this off. The valve turns off, turn it back on, the valves turn on. At this point, the only thing to note here is that if these lights aren't bright, or if one of the lights is flickering, that means you've got a bad connection somewhere. So it's important to make sure that these lights are nice and solid and there's no flickering. A very easy way to test if you've got good signal and good power going from the box through the cables all the way to the end connector. Now I'm going to remove this connector and plug the cables back in, and next we're going to test the flow meter. So next we're going to use this other cable in the diagnostics kit. So this one's got a male and female MetroPack connector, 2 lights and a switch. So we're going to use this to make sure that we've got everything working from the Storm Commander box all the way to the connector that connects into the flow meter. So in the event that your flow meter is not working or you're not getting readings from it, this would be your next step. So the flow meter on this sprayer is located at the back. I'm going to reach out and unplug the connector going into the flow meter. To this connector, I am going to plug this end in like so. What I see is that the red light turns on instantly and the green light is also on. The red light indicates that we've got good power going from the control box all the way to this end here. The fact that it's on means that the ground is good as well. Now at this point, for me to be able to simulate pulses that would otherwise be coming from the flow meter, I am just going to toggle this switch on and off. So it's a 3-position switch. And what you will see here is that you will start reading some flow. As we can see on the screen, you will start reading some flow. So the switch is essentially simulating pulses that would otherwise come from the flow meter. So this test tells us that the Storm Commander box is able to supply a good power, and when the switch sends back pulses through this connector back into the unit, those pulses are able to make their way back to the Storm Commander, and we have a complete circuit. Now at this point, we can plug this end back in to the flow meter to see if any of these lights become less bright or start to flicker, which will essentially tell us if it's a signal problem or if it's another problem like that. Because oftentimes what would happen is that this connector, when plugged back into the flow meter, will not connect well to the terminals inside the flow meter. So that might cause issues with either the signal or the power. So by using this circuit here, we can essentially diagnose all of that and figure out if the problem is actually with the connector or if it's with the actual hardware. So in the event that your control box is not able to pair with the Storm Commander display, there are a few things that can be done to diagnose the problem. First thing is to make sure that you've got good solid 12 volts coming into this fuse here. In the older models, we don't have a fuse here. You could always connect test power on this white cable going in. If you've got good power, then the next step to see is if this light in the top right hand corner is on and the other light in the bottom right hand corner is on. If these two lights are on and you've got good power going into the system, that indicates that the sprayer or the controller might need a reflash. So if your light on the outside of the box isn't blinking, you've got good 12 volts here, this light is on, top right hand corner, this light is on, bottom right hand corner, and you're not able to get this to sync with the inside unit, your display might need a reflash. Now, if the LED is blinking and you're still not able to get this to sync, that means there's a firmware issue. So the box might be running a 2022 firmware, whereas the display might be running a 2023 or vice versa. But if the LED is not blinking and you've got 12 volts here and these two lights are on, that means it's a reflash issue. So reflashing is actually quite simple. We provide a kit that you can use to reflash these. Again, the same kit will work for 2022 and 2023 versions. In order to reflash the firmware, we're going to assemble this kit by connecting the connector onto the port here. Once this is connected, we're going to connect the other end onto the circuit board here. So once we've got the programmer connected, you will see that only one red light on the bottom left-hand corner will be on. At this point, we're going to use BTN1 to select the firmware that we're looking to flash. Red is for 2022, green is for 2023. So selecting BTN will let you toggle between the two firmwares. So this is a 2023 unit, so we're going to use the green firmware, and now we're going to hit BTN2. At this point, all the lights will turn on. This indicates that the firmware reflash process is in progress. If the lights don't turn on or you see blinks, that means you got to start again. So disconnect the cable, connect it back again, and then do the process from start to end again. So this reflash usually takes about 45 seconds, after which the firmware that was successfully flashed will remain lit up and all the other lights will turn off. So we'll give it about 45 seconds until the firmware reflash process is complete. So the firmware reflash process is complete. Green is what we had reflashed. So that's the only light that we have here. Now, if this were a 2022, you may actually have a slightly different connector on this end versus what we've got here. So that connector is actually a through-hole connector for which we've got a cable like this. So instead of using this white cable that goes into the circuit board, we're going to be using a through-hole cable here. The only thing to note is that it's got a red wire that's supposed to be going into where it says 3v3 on the connector. And on the circuit board side will be a connector that will have a similar port around the same location as we've got this programming connector here. We're going to hook up this wire into that connector. Instead of pushing it all the way down into the board, it's a good idea to just push it in a little bit and then apply force downwards like this, just so that these terminals make good connection, and then the rest of the process is the same. Care must be taken while doing this update because we've got 12 volts here, some high currents, so you don't want to, it's probably a good idea to just turn everything off before you plug these wires in. But the firmware process again is the same. You press BTN1 to select what firmware you want to flash, and then BTN2 to proceed with the flashing. So over here we've got a 2022 version of the MTS Pro liquid controller receiver box. Like with everything else, if you've got power coming in, these lights are on, and you still don't have a blinking light, this thing could use a firmware flash. Unlike the 2023, this one's got a loose connector here that we're going to be plugging this wire into. Red is power, and there is a small 3v3 that we see on the right hand side here. So I'm going to carefully plug in 3v3 into red like so. We would highly recommend that you do this with the power off, of course, because there's 12 volts and some high current signals in there. Okay, so once that is done, I'm going to apply some downward pressure like this, make sure I've got a good connection. Just like we did with the 2023, we're going to use BTN1 to select our program. So this time it's a 2022. I'm applying some downward pressure here to make sure we've got a good connection. And then I'm going to hit BTN2 to start the flashing process. Again, at this point, if all the lights start to blink, disconnect, reconnect, and start again. Well, this one seems to be working okay so far, so we're going to continue to apply pressure on that connector here. And in about 45 seconds, all the lights should turn off, and only the program that was successfully flashed should remain on. Once again, firmware reflash will only work if everything else is good. So yeah, this worked. We can see that the LED on the outside of the box is blinking again. The firmware flash is good. Now I'm just going to very carefully remove this cable. Again, we recommend that you disconnect power before you do this. So this is done. Just to reiterate, firmware flash will only solve your blinking LED problem if your LED isn't blinking properly, if you don't have good power going in, if you're blowing fuses, or if there's any other issues. Firmware reflash is not a solution to that. Your 2022 boards could actually have a 2023 firmware on them as well. So depending on when you got the sprayer, if you got it in 2023, it's likely a 2023 firmware. It could still have a 2022 connector. So it's probably best to just call your dealer or wherever you bought the sprayer from to make sure that you've got the right firmware version. Programming the incorrect firmware on the controller box will in no way wreck it. So if you're not sure, try a specific firmware and try resyncing it with the Storm Commander. If it doesn't work, try a different one. So that in no way should damage the unit completely. Reflashing, while it's not needed very often, but it can be done more than once, it does not have any detrimental effects on the electronics itself.